My mother threw her muddy car keys at my chest and told me to park her Mercedes because she thought I was the hired help. She did not realize that the $4.5 million beachfront mansion she was standing in, the one she had been bragging about to her wealthy friends for months, actually belonged to me. By the time the sheriff arrived with the eviction notice, it was too late for apologies. Before I tell you how I kicked 23 of my relatives out into a hurricane on Christmas Eve, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who finally bought the whole farm. I am Amara Jacobs, 32 years old. For 15 years, my family forgot to invite me to Christmas. I usually found out they were gathering by seeing my sister Clarissa post photos on Instagram captioning them "Family First," while I sat alone in my apartment eating takeout. But this year was different. This year I was waiting for them. The storm over Hilton Head Island was brutal. Rain slashed sideways against the windows of the Sapphire Legacy, the oceanfront estate my grandmother Nana Rose had left behind. I stood in the foyer swirling a glass of vintage Petrus wine that cost more than my sister's entire wardrobe, watching the security monitors. Outside the massive iron gates, a convoy of 5 luxury SUVs had ground to a halt. I zoomed in on the camera feed. My brother-in-law Hunter was already out of his Range Rover. He was kicking the iron bars, his face turning red. Hunter was a man who thought his white skin and a cheap suit gave him permission to own the world. He was screaming into the intercom, but the old code they used for years no longer worked. I had changed it 10 minutes ago. My mother Beatrice was rolling down her window, yelling at the empty air. She looked terrified that the rain might touch her blowout. I took a slow sip of wine, savoring the tannins, and tapped the open button on my iPad. The gates groaned open. As the cars rolled up the long, winding driveway, I smoothed down my silk robe. It was time. I opened the heavy oak front doors just as the convoy pulled up. Hunter jumped out, not even bothering to grab an umbrella. He marched up the steps, wiping rain from his forehead. About time, someone opened up. Hunter snapped, pushing past me without even looking at my face. The service in this place has gone to hell since the old lady died. I did not move. I just stood there, blocking the entrance for the rest of them. My mother stepped out of the second car. She was draped in a faux fur coat that she definitely could not afford. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my face with that familiar mix of disappointment and annoyance. Amara Beatrice said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I did not know you were working here." "Well, at least you have a job. Don't just stand there posing." She dug into her purse and pulled out her key fob. She tossed it at me. It was a lazy, underhanded throw. "Park the car in the garage," Beatrice commanded, breezing past me toward the warmth of the foyer. "And be careful. Hunter's golf clubs are in the trunk, and they are worth $5,000. Do not scratch the leather seats with your rough hands." The keys sailed through the air. I could have caught them. I have excellent reflexes. Instead, I let my hands remain perfectly still around my wineglass. The keys hit my silk robe and clattered loudly onto the wet, muddy pavement of the porch. Beatrice stopped. She turned around slowly, her mouth open in shock. "Oops," I said, my voice smooth and low. "Sorry, Mother. My hands are full with a $500 glass of wine. I think you can park your own car." She looked at the keys in the mud, then back at me. Her eyes narrowed. For a second, I thought she might slap me, but she knew better. She just huffed, picked up the muddy keys, and muttered something about me being useless as always. "Get inside and make yourself useful," she hissed. "Clarissa is bringing the kids. Try not to scare them." I stepped aside and let the invasion begin. They swarmed into the house like locusts. 23 people. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and the chaotic energy of my sister's children. They dragged mud onto the marble floors. They threw wet coats onto the antique sofas. They treated the house with the disrespect of people who believe they are entitled to everything without paying for anything. I leaned against a pillar in the living room watching them. My sister Clarissa made her grand entrance last. She was wearing a white cashmere set that looked ridiculous for a rainy day. Clarissa was the golden child. Light skin, curly hair, the trophy wife who had never worked a day in her life. She looked at me and sneered. "Why are you wearing that?" Clarissa asked, pointing at my robe. "You look like you are lounging. Go get the bags from the car." "I am not carrying your bags, Clarissa," I said calmly. "Fine." She rolled her eyes. "Just stay out of the way." "God, you are so dark you practically disappear in this hallway lighting." "It is creepy." She marched up the grand staircase, her heels clicking aggressively on the wood. I followed her, keeping a safe distance. I knew exactly where she was going. Clarissa walked straight to the master suite at the end of the hall. This was the crown jewel of the house. It had a private balcony overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, a fireplace and a bathroom bigger than my first apartment. It was also the room I had been sleeping in for the past week. I stood in the doorway as Clarissa threw the door open. She stopped seeing my suitcase on the bed and my toiletries on the vanity. "What is this trash?" she shrieked. She walked over to the bed, grabbed my suitcase and hurled it into the hallway. My clothes spilled out onto the floor. Then she grabbed my expensive moisturizer and tossed it after the bag. It cracked against the wall. "This is the master suite, Amara," she spat, turning to face me. "This room is for me and Hunter. We are the successful couple. We need the space. You can sleep in the basement." "The basement?" I asked, keeping my face completely neutral. "Yes, the basement," she said, kicking the door shut in my face. "There is a pull-out couch next to the washing machine. It is perfect for you. You can do the laundry while you are down there. It is quieter. We don't want to see you roaming around upstairs." I looked at the closed door. I could hear her laughing inside, telling Hunter that she had handled the help. I calmly bent down and began gathering my spilled clothes. I did not feel anger. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. What I felt was cold, calculated. I picked up my phone and opened the smart home app connected to the entire estate. I scrolled down to the master suite settings. Current temperature 72 degrees. I tapped the minus button. I held it down until the number dropped. 60, 55, 50. I set the master suite thermostat to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I engaged the child lock feature so the controls on the wall would be disabled. "Sleep tight, Clarissa," I whispered. I walked down the hall to the guest room I had already prepared for myself, the one with the hidden safe and the backup generator. As I closed my door, locking out the noise of my ungrateful family, I sent a text message to the private number of Sheriff Davis. "The intruders are inside. Let the games begin." The smell of roasted garlic and buttered lobster filled the entire downstairs of the mansion. It was a scent that usually signaled celebration, but tonight it smelled like theft. I stood in the archway of the dining room watching my mother orchestrate the seating arrangement like a general on a battlefield. The long mahogany table, which my grandmother Nana Rose had imported from Italy 40 years ago, was set for a king. Crystal goblets sparkled under the chandelier light. Silverware that I had personally polished just last week was laid out perfectly. And sitting at the head of the table in my grandfather's chair was Hunter. My brother-in-law looked ridiculous. He had tucked a napkin into his collar like a cartoon character. He was already reaching for the wine bottle of vintage Cabernet I had been saving for a special occasion. I watched him pour a glass for himself, filling it to the brim with zero class or appreciation for the vintage. Beside him sat Clarissa, glowing in her white dress, looking every bit the pampered princess. Her light skin seemed to be the only currency that mattered in this family. Next to her were their two children, Trey and Maya, who were already banging their forks on the antique wood, demanding food. I took a step forward, intending to take the empty seat at the far end of the table. It was the seat furthest from Hunter, which was exactly where I wanted to be. But before I could pull out the chair, my mother's voice stopped me dead in my tracks. "Not there," Amara Beatrice said, not even looking up from slicing the roast beef. "That seat is for your Aunt Sarah when she arrives tomorrow. We do not want to mess up the place setting." I looked around the table. There were 12 chairs. There were currently 6 people in the room. There are plenty of seats. "Mother," I said, my voice steady, "I am sure Aunt Sarah will not mind if I eat dinner with the family today." Beatrice finally looked at me. She put down the carving knife and sighed a dramatic exhale that shook her shoulders. She looked at me with that familiar mix of pity and disdain. "It is not about the chair, Amara," she said, lowering her voice as if doing me a favor. "Look at the aesthetic. Everyone is wearing white or cream. The lighting is perfect. We are going to take a family photo for the Christmas card right here at the table." She gestured vaguely at my face, then at my hands. "You are just so dark, honey. You know how the camera struggles to balance the exposure when you are in the frame with Clarissa and the kids? You will just look like a shadow. It ruins the composition." The room went silent. Even the kids stopped banging their forks. I felt the old sting, the one I had felt since I was 7 years old, prickling behind my eyes. But I was not 7 anymore. I was 32. I owned the building they were sitting in. Hunter let out a short bark of a laugh. He leaned back, swirling my wine in his glass. "Your mom is right, Amara." Hunter chuckled, his face flushed with alcohol. "You would blend right in with the background. We would not want people asking why there is a floating pair of eyes in the Christmas photo." "It is spooky," Clarissa giggled. She covered her mouth with her manicured hand, but her eyes were dancing with amusement. "Don't be mean, Hunter," she said, though she clearly enjoyed it. "Amara, just be reasonable. Mom set up a nice spot for you in the kitchen. It is cozy, plus you can be close to the oven if we need anything warmed up." I looked at them. I looked at Hunter, red-faced and bloated. I looked at Clarissa, cruel and shallow. I looked at my mother, who prioritized an Instagram photo over her own daughter's dignity. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. "Understood," I said softly. "I would hate to ruin your aesthetic." I walked over to the sideboard. There was one bottle of Petrus left, the 1989 vintage, worth roughly $5,000. Hunter had not opened it yet because the label was in French and he was too ignorant to know what it was. I picked it up. "What are you doing?" Hunter asked, eyeing the bottle. "Is that for the kitchen?" "This," I said, cradling the bottle like a baby, "is a little too complex for this table. I think I will enjoy it by myself. It pairs better with solitude than with stupidity." I turned on my heel and walked into the kitchen. I heard Hunter mutter something about me being stingy, but I did not care. The kitchen was cold. The sleek stainless steel appliances hummed in the silence. In the corner next to the swinging door, my mother had set up a card table. It was a flimsy, square folding table with one leg that was shorter than the others. There was no tablecloth, no crystal glass, just a paper plate and a plastic fork. I sat down on the metal folding chair. It screeched against the tile floor. I uncorked the $5,000 bottle of wine and poured it into a coffee mug I found in the cabinet. I took a sip. It tasted like velvet and blackberries. It tasted like revenge. I could hear the laughter from the dining room. They were toasting to family, to success, to the legacy they thought they controlled. I took a bite of a cold bread roll I had grabbed on my way out. Suddenly the kitchen door swung open. It was Trey, my 8-year-old nephew. He was a miniature version of Hunter, entitled and spoiled, with sauce stains already ruining his white shirt. He stood there staring at me, sitting at the small table. "What are you doing?" Trey asked, wrinkling his nose. "I am having dinner, Trey," I said, not looking at him. "Go back to your parents. Mommy says you are eating in here because you are the help," Trey said, walking closer. He had a cruel glint in his eyes, the kind children learn from watching their parents. "Daddy says you are a loser who cannot afford a real table." I took another sip of wine. I did not engage. Engaging with a child was beneath me. "This is my house, Trey," I said calmly. "Remember that." "No, it is not," he shouted. "It is Grandmommy's house, and you are just the maid." He reached out his hand. On my rickety table sat a plate of lobster tail and steak I had prepared for myself before they arrived. It was the only hot food I had. Trey looked me dead in the eye. He smiled, a mimic of his father's smirk. "Maids do not eat lobster," he said. With a sudden violent shove, he pushed my plate. I watched in slow motion as the paper plate slid across the uneven surface. It tipped over the edge. The lobster tail, the steak, and the garlic butter sauce crashed onto the floor. The sauce splattered across my silk pants and onto my expensive Italian loafers. Oops, Trey laughed. Now you have to clean it up. Since you are the maid. He turned and ran back into the dining room, yelling for his mother to tell her what he had done. I sat there looking at the ruined meal on the floor. I listened to the roar of laughter erupt from the other room as Trey recounted his victory. I finished my wine in one gulp. I set the mug down on the table with a thud. Okay, I whispered to the empty kitchen. No more mercy. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the banking app that controlled the family trust fund, the one my father used to pay for Hunter's car lease and Clarissa's credit cards. I tapped the tab labeled Authorized Users. I selected Hunter. I selected Clarissa. I pressed delete. The notification popped up, access revoked, cards declined. I stood up, stepping over the spilled lobster. It was time to join the party. The living room of the Sapphire Legacy had been transformed from a sanctuary of high art into a chaotic playground. My brother-in-law Hunter was sprawled out on the custom Italian leather sofa, with his feet up on the coffee table, still wearing his muddy shoes. He was picking his teeth with a plastic flosser he had pulled from his pocket, flicking the debris onto the Persian rug. My mother, Beatrice, was busy criticizing the curtains, claiming the fabric looked cheap, unaware that those drapes were hand-woven silk imported from India. But the real center of chaos was Trey. My 8-year-old nephew was running circles around the room, fueled by sugar and a complete lack of discipline. He was throwing a rubber ball against the walls, the thudding sound echoing through the high ceilings. Every time the ball hit the plaster, I winced, but I stayed silent. I was leaning against the doorway, observing them like a scientist studying a particularly destructive species of invasive pests. Trey set his sights on the corner of the room. Standing on a pedestal was a sculpture that my grandmother Nana Rose had cherished more than anything else in her collection. It was a sleek, abstract figure carved from black obsidian, created by a renowned Nigerian artist. It was heavy, it was beautiful, and it was appraised at $12,500. Hey Trey, watch out for that, I said, keeping my voice low and even. Clarissa looked up from her phone, where she was busy editing a selfie to make her waist look smaller. Don't yell at him. Amara, she snapped. He is just playing. You are making him self-conscious. Go ahead, baby. Have fun. Trey grinned, emboldened by his mother's permission. He threw the ball harder. It bounced off the wall and rolled behind the pedestal. He chased after it, not slowing down. He slammed his shoulder into the stand. It happened in slow motion. The pedestal wobbled. The black obsidian figure tipped forward. Gravity took over. There was a sickening crunch as the sculpture hit the marble floor. It did not just break. It shattered. $12,000 worth of art exploded into jagged black shards that skittered across the room like shrapnel. The room went dead silent. Trey froze, looking down at the destruction. For a second, he looked terrified. Then he looked at his mother. Clarissa stood up. She walked over to the mess, stepping carefully over the pieces. She looked at the shattered art, then at her son, and finally at me. God, Amara. Clarissa sighed, rolling her eyes. Why would you put something so fragile right where kids are playing? That is just irresponsible. She turned to Trey and patted his head. It is okay, sweetie. It was just an ugly old rock anyway, probably some junk Nana picked up at a flea market. I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. That ugly old rock was a gift from my grandfather to my grandmother on their 50th anniversary. That sculpture was worth $12,500. Clarissa, I said, my voice cutting through the air. Hunter laughed from the sofa. He did not even sit up. Yeah, right, Hunter scoffed. That thing, it looked like a paperweight. Stop trying to make us feel bad just because your cheap decoration broke. It is probably insured for $20. Clarissa waved her hand dismissively. You heard him, Amara. Stop being dramatic. Besides, it is a safety hazard now. Look at this glass everywhere. She pointed a manicured finger at the floor, then pointed it directly at my face. Clean this up. Now. Before Trey cuts his foot. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. She had just destroyed a masterpiece, insulted my grandmother's memory, and was now ordering me to clean it up like I was a maid service. I did not move. I did not rush to the closet to get a broom. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my silk robe and pulled out my iPhone 14 Pro. I walked toward the mess. Clarissa crossed her arms, looking annoyed. "What are you doing? Are you texting your imaginary boyfriend?" "Put the phone down and get a dustpan." I ignored her. I opened the camera app. I switched to video mode, ensuring the flash was on. I started recording. I panned slowly across the shattered obsidian. I zoomed in on the jagged edges. I captured the pedestal lying on its side. Then I panned up to Trey, who was standing there looking guilty, and finally to Clarissa, who was looking furious. "Stop filming me!" Clarissa shrieked. She lunged for the phone, but I took a smooth step back. "I am documenting the scene of the incident," I said calmly, keeping the camera steady. "Incident." Clarissa laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "You are insane. It is just a broken statue." I switched to photo mode. Snap. A wide shot of the room. Snap. A close-up of the debris. Snap. A picture of Hunter laughing on the couch in the background. I lowered the phone and looked Clarissa dead in the eye. "I want to be very clear about this, Clarissa. Are you refusing to clean up the damage your son caused?" Clarissa stepped into my personal space. She smelled like expensive perfume and desperation. "I am a guest in this house," she hissed. "And you are here to serve us." "That is what Mom said. That is what you have always been, the help. So, yes, I am refusing. Now get on your knees and clean up this trash before I tell Mom you are being abusive to my child." I held her gaze for 3 seconds. That was all the time I needed to make my decision. "Okay," I said softly. I turned around and walked away from the mess. "Where are you going?" Clarissa yelled after me. I said, "Clean it up." I walked over to the heavy oak desk in the corner of the room. I sat down and unlocked my phone again. I opened the dedicated app for the high-value asset insurance policy I had taken out on the estate 3 months ago. I selected the option for File a New Claim. Under Incident Type, I selected Property Damage by Third Party. Under Description, I typed quickly, my thumbs flying across the screen. Unauthorized guests gained access to the property. Significant damage to artwork. Item number 402, the Obsidian Dancer. Guests refused to mitigate damage or offer compensation. Hostile behavior noted. I attached the 5 photos. I attached the video of Clarissa admitting she refused to clean it up. There was a final box at the bottom of the screen. Estimated value of claim. I typed in $12,500. Then I scrolled down to the section labeled Responsible Party. I entered Clarissa's full name, her home address in Atlanta, and for good measure, I added Hunter's name as the secondary responsible party. I hovered my finger over the Submit button. From the center of the room, Clarissa shouted again. "Amara, are you deaf?" I said. "Get a broom." I looked up at her and smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just locked the cage door. I tapped Submit. A notification popped up instantly. "Claim received. Legal recovery team will contact the responsible party within 24 hours. I put the phone down on the desk and picked up my wine glass. "I am not cleaning that up. Clarissa," I said, my voice echoing in the large room. "But do not worry. You will be paying for a professional restoration crew to handle it, and trust me, they charge extra for weekend calls." The smell of expensive tobacco began to drift down the hallway, invading the fresh ocean air of my home. It was a pungent, heavy scent that clung to the curtains and the furniture. I knew exactly where it was coming from. My grandfather's study, a room I had kept preserved exactly as he left it, was now being defiled. I sat in the living room, my laptop open on my knees. From where I sat, I had a clear line of sight to the slightly ajar door of the study. Through the gap, I could see them. My father Luther was sitting in the oversized leather armchair, looking small and eager. Across from him, leaning back with his feet on the mahogany desk, was Hunter. Hunter was holding one of my grandfather's Cuban cigars, puffing on it like he owned the plantation. He was also holding a glass of amber liquid. I squinted. Yes, that was the 30-year-old single malt scotch from the top shelf, the bottle I had been saving for my wedding day. Hunter was chugging it like it was cheap beer. I did not storm in there. I did not snatch the glass from his hand. Instead, I adjusted my noise-canceling headphones around my neck and turned up the gain on the room's ambient microphone. I had installed security audio in the study months ago to monitor humidity levels for the book collection, but right now, it was serving a much more entertaining purpose. I listened as Hunter spun his web of lies. "You have to understand," Luther Hunter said, his voice loud and booming with unearned confidence. "The market is volatile, sure. But that is where the real lions eat. I just moved a substantial amount of capital into a decentralized crypto exchange based in the Caymans. We are talking about a 300% return on investment by Q3. My father nodded enthusiastically, his eyes wide with admiration. He looked at Hunter, the way he never looked at me. He looked at him with pride. "That is incredible, Hunter," my father said. "I always knew you had a head for business, much better than those safe, boring mutual funds I have been holding on to." "Safe is for losers," Luther Hunter scoffed, taking a long drag of the cigar. "You have to be aggressive. That is why Clarissa and I are looking at buying a vacation home in the Alps next year. The cash flow is just insane right now. I honestly do not know where to put all the liquidity." I typed a command into my laptop. I was not checking my email. I was logging into the LexisNexis Risk Management Database, a tool I use daily for my job as a crisis management consultant. My family thought I was a freelancer who designed logos for $5 on the internet. They had no idea that my actual job involved cleaning up the messes of Fortune 500 CEOs. I had access to financial data that most background checks missed. I entered Hunter's full legal name, Hunter James Montgomery. I entered his social security number, which I had memorized years ago when he begged me to co-sign a car loan. I refused then, and I was about to find out why that was the best decision of my life. Inside the study, the conversation shifted. Hunter needed to elevate himself by pushing someone else down. I was the convenient target. "It must be nice to have that kind of freedom," my father said, sighing. "Amara is struggling, you know. She just sits on that computer all day. I worry about her." Hunter laughed. It was a wet, condescending sound. "Don't waste your pity, Luther. Amara chooses to be a bottom feeder. She is what, a freelancer? That is just a fancy word for unemployed. She has no ambition. She is happy living paycheck to paycheck doing little odd jobs. She probably spent her last dime on that dress she is wearing, just to look like she fits in here." My fingers flew across the keyboard. The database was processing. The loading wheels spun for 3 seconds. "She lacks the killer instinct," Hunter continued. "She is soft. She expects handouts. Honestly, Clarissa and I were talking, and we think Amara might need some tough love. Maybe after Christmas you should stop enabling her. Cut her off completely. It is the only way she will learn to survive in the real world." The database pinged. The report appeared on my screen. I stopped breathing for a second. I expected bad news. I expected some credit card debt. But I did not expect this. The entire screen was a sea of red text. At the very top in bold letters was a notification. Chapter 7. Bankruptcy Filing. Pending Court Date. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the carnage. Primary residence in Atlanta. Foreclosure proceedings initiated. Notice of default sent 30 days ago. Vehicle loans repossession order active. 2 Range Rovers and a Porsche. Status, hidden/location unknown. Credit score, 420. I looked at the debts. It was staggering. $450,000 in unsecured credit card debt. Another $200,000 in personal loans from predatory lenders. Hunter was not a crypto genius. He was a drowning man. He was insolvent. He was technically homeless. The vacation home in the Alps. He could not even afford a ski pass. I looked up from the screen, staring through the open door at the man who was currently lecturing my father on wealth management. "You really have to diversify," Luther Hunter was saying, swirling my expensive scotch. "If you want, I can take a look at your retirement portfolio. I can probably double it for you if you transfer management rights to my firm." I felt a chill run down my spine. He was not just bragging. He was hunting. He was trying to get access to my father's pension to cover his own debts before the court seized his assets. He was going to steal from his own father-in-law. I saved the PDF file to my desktop. I named it Hunter_the_fraud.pdf. I backed it up to the cloud. Suddenly, a loud, jarring ringtone cut through the air. It was the generic, urgent trill of a phone that had not been silenced. Hunter jumped. He nearly spilled the scotch on his lap. He fumbled for his phone, which was sitting on the desk. I watched his face change. The arrogance vanished in a split second, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. He stared at the screen. "Who is it?" my father asked. "Is it a client?" Hunter silenced the call quickly, flipping the phone face down on the desk. His hand was shaking. "Yeah, just international business," Hunter stammered. "Time zones, you know. They call at weird hours. I will take it later." I looked at my laptop screen again. The report listed the phone numbers of the aggressive collection agencies that had been assigned to his case. I memorized the area code. The phone rang again. Same number. Hunter looked like he was about to vomit. He grabbed the phone and stood up. I need to take this," he said, his voice cracking. "Sorry, Luther. Big deal closing. Need privacy." He rushed out of the study, bypassing the living room where I sat, and headed for the back patio into the rain. He did not even look at me. I watched him go. I took a sip of my wine. "Pick up the phone, Hunter," I whispered to myself. "It is not a client. It is the consequences of your actions, and they are calling collect." The fire in the grand limestone hearth was roaring, casting long, dancing shadows across the living room walls. It was the only source of warmth in the entire house, considering the people sitting around it were colder than the ice storm raging outside. My mother Beatrice had insisted on an early gift exchange. She claimed it was because we were all together for the first time in years, but I knew the real reason. She wanted to see what Hunter had bought for Clarissa. In her mind, love was measured in carats and designer labels, and tonight was the performance review. I sat in a wingback chair, slightly apart from the main circle, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I watched as Hunter wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He looked nauseous. He was vibrating with the nervous energy of a man who knew he was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Peter was coming to collect with a baseball bat. "Okay, me first," Clarissa squealed, clapping her hands like a toddler. She sat on the rug, surrounded by the discarded wrapping paper of the gifts the children had already torn open. Hunter stood up, his hand shaking slightly as he reached behind the sofa. He pulled out the iconic orange box. The room went silent. Even my mother stopped checking her reflection in the window. Hermes Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest. "Oh, Hunter, you did not." Hunter forced a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "Nothing but the best for my queen," he said, his voice cracking. Clarissa tore the ribbon off. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a Birkin bag in classic gold Togo leather. It was a bag that retailed for $12,000, but on the resale market, it could fetch $20,000. I knew for a fact Hunter had put this on his platinum card yesterday, the same card I had flagged in my report as being maxed out to 99% of its limit. This bag was the straw that broke the camel's back. Clarissa screamed. She pulled the bag out and hugged it, burying her face in the leather. "Oh my God," she cried. "It is perfect. Look, Mom, it matches my new coat. Thank you, baby. You are the best husband in the world. She kissed Hunter, leaving a smudge of red lipstick on his pale, sweaty cheek. My mother beamed at them, her eyes glistening with greed. That is what a real man provides, Beatrice said, glancing sideways at me. He invests in his wife's happiness. You are a lucky woman, Clarissa. Then the attention shifted. The room grew quiet again, but this time the silence was heavy with awkwardness. It was my turn. My mother reached under the tree and pulled out a small, lumpy package wrapped in wrinkled paper. It looked like it had been wrapped in the dark. She held it out to me, her smile tight and condescending. Here you go, Amara Beatrice said. We did not forget you. I know things have been tight for you lately with your little freelance gigs, so I wanted to get you something practical, something you actually need. I stood up and took the package. It felt light. I sat back down and slowly peeled off the tape. I opened the box. Inside there was a stack of paper. I pulled it out. It was a bundle of grocery store coupons. I flipped through them. 50 cents off canned tuna. Buy one, get one free cat food. $1 off generic laundry detergent. I looked closer at the expiration dates. October 2019. May 2020. They were expired. Every single one of them. I dug deeper into the box. Underneath the trash there was a pile of fabric. I pulled it out. It was a tangled mess of lace and polyester. I recognized it immediately. It was lingerie. But it was not new. The lace was frayed at the edges. The elastic was stretched out. There was a faint stale smell of cheap perfume clinging to it. It was Clarissa's old underwear. I stared at the bundle in my hands. The disrespect was so absolute, so visceral, that for a moment I could not even process it. My mother cleared her throat. I was helping Clarissa clean out her closet last week, Beatrice explained, her voice dripping with fake charity. She was going to donate those to Goodwill, but I said no, save them for Amara. You always wear those dark, shapeless clothes. I figured you liked the ragged look. But a woman should still feel sexy underneath, right? Even if she does not have a man. Clarissa giggled, stroking her new $20,000 bag. Yeah, Amara, Clarissa added. Those are Victoria's Secret. They are vintage now. I barely wore them. Maybe if you dress better, you could actually land a boyfriend who can buy you a real gift. I looked at the expired coupons in one hand and the used lingerie in the other. I looked at Hunter, who was avoiding my gaze. I looked at Clarissa, smirking. I looked at my mother, who looked proud of her benevolence. They expected me to cry. They expected me to run out of the room so they could laugh about how sensitive I was. They wanted to break me. Instead, I started to laugh. It was a low, dry chuckle at first, then it grew louder. I laughed until I had to wipe a tear from my eye. Thank you, Mother, I said, my voice steady and loud enough to reach the back of the room. This is truly enlightening. I stood up, holding the box like it was a sacred artifact. I really appreciate you showing me exactly how much I am worth to you. I continued, walking slowly toward the fireplace. It makes my future decisions so much easier. You know, I was researching retirement facilities for you just the other day. Beatrice frowned. Retirement facilities? What are you talking about? I am not going to a home. I stopped in front of the roaring fire. The heat flushed against my face. Oh, we all get old, Mother, I said, turning to face her. And when that day comes and you need someone to sign the checks for your care, I will remember this moment. I will remember the expired coupons, and I will make sure to choose the state-funded facility with the 1-star rating and the bed bugs. Beatrice's mouth dropped open. How dare you, she sputtered. You ungrateful little brat. I held the box over the fire. Clarissa stood up. Wait, Amara, don't, she said, realizing too late that the mood had shifted. I smiled. Merry Christmas, family, I whispered. I dropped the box. It landed right in the center of the flames. The dry paper of the coupons caught fire instantly. A bright yellow flare shot up. Then the polyester of the cheap lingerie began to melt. It curled and blackened, releasing a thick black smoke that smelled of burning plastic and toxic chemicals. The fire roared, consuming the insult in seconds. I dusted off my hands as if wiping away dirt. "Oops," I said, mimicking my mother's tone from earlier. "I guess I am just clumsy today." I turned around and walked toward the door, leaving them staring at the black smoke billowing into their beautifully decorated room. Cliffhanger. As I reached the doorway, I stopped and looked back at Hunter. "Oh, by the way, Hunter," I said, "you might want to check the return policy on that Hermes bag. I heard the credit card company is doing fraud checks on large purchases made by insolvent accounts tonight. Just a heads up." I walked out before he could say a word. The storm had passed, leaving behind a morning sky so blue it looked painted. The sun beat down on the limestone terrace of the Sapphire Legacy, bleaching everything in its path. It was the kind of morning that real estate agents prayed for, the kind that sold multi-million-dollar dreams. For my family, it was the stage for their annual performance of perfection. It was the day of the all-white family photo shoot. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the guest room, smoothing down the front of my dress. I had followed the dress code. I was wearing a Solace London maxi dress in pure, blinding white. The fabric clung to my curves in a way that was elegant but undeniable. Against my deep, dark skin, the white looked electric. It was a striking contrast. I looked like a queen. I looked like money. I took a deep breath. Despite the expired coupons and the used underwear from the night before, a tiny foolish part of me still wanted to be included. I wanted a picture with my father. Just one proof that I existed in this lineage. I walked down the grand staircase and out onto the sprawling back patio. The scene before me was like a spread in a high-end lifestyle magazine. The ocean roared gently in the background. A professional photographer, a young black man with dreadlocks and a massive camera lens, was setting up light stands. My family was clustered near the infinity pool. They were a sea of cream and linen. Hunter was wearing a white polo that strained against his gut. My mother Beatrice was in a white lace caftan, posing with a glass of mimosa. Clarissa was the centerpiece, of course. She wore a white strapless jumpsuit, her light skin glowing with layers of bronzer and shimmer. She was busy arranging her children Trey and Maya like props on a movie set. "Okay, Trey, stop squinting," Clarissa barked, fixing his collar. "We need to look happy, rich and happy. That is the brand." I stepped out into the sunlight. My heels clicked softly on the stone. "Good morning," I said. The chatter stopped. Heads turned. For a split second, I saw something in Hunter's eyes. It was lust. I looked good and he knew it. Then I saw my mother's eyes. It was surprise. She didn't think I had anything this nice to wear. But then I saw Clarissa's eyes. It was pure, unadulterated jealousy. She saw how the white dress popped against my skin. She saw that I was taller, statelier, and naturally striking without a pound of makeup. She saw that if I stepped into that frame, nobody would be looking at her. Clarissa marched over to the photographer. She whispered something in his ear. The photographer looked uncomfortable. He glanced at me, then back at her, shaking his head slightly. "No, ma'am, I think the lighting is fine," the photographer said, his voice low. "She looks great. The contrast would actually be really beautiful." Clarissa's face tightened. She turned around and marched toward me. "Amara, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice shrill. "I am here for the photo, Clarissa," I said. The invite said all white. "I am wearing all white." Clarissa let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She stepped into my personal space, blocking the sun. "You cannot be serious," she said. "Look at you." I looked down at myself. "I am looking," I said. "I see someone who followed the instructions." "You are ruining the aesthetic," Amara, Clarissa hissed. She lowered her voice so the photographer wouldn't hear the specifics, but the venom was loud and clear. "This is a high-key shoot. Everything needs to be light and airy. You are too dark. You absorb the light. You are going to throw off the white balance of the entire camera." I felt like I had been slapped. It was the same insult from when I was 12 and 15 and 20. You are too dark. You don't fit the aesthetic. I looked over Clarissa's shoulder at my father. Luther was standing by the pool sipping his coffee. He was watching us. He heard her. Dad, I said, raising my voice slightly. Clarissa turned to him too. Daddy, tell her Clarissa whined. She is going to make the picture look heavy. It is supposed to be ethereal. She looks like a shadow in that dress. My father looked at me. He looked at his daughter, the one he was proud of, the one who was standing there in the sun. Then he looked at me, the daughter he kept in the shade. He sighed. It was the sigh of a coward. Amara, honey. Luther said, his voice weary. Just don't cause a scene today. You know how important this is to your sister. Her Instagram sponsors need a certain look. But I am your daughter, I said, my voice trembling slightly. This is a family photo. Am I not family? Luther looked away. He looked at the ocean. Maybe you can jump in for a funny one at the end, he mumbled. But for the formal portrait, maybe it is best if you sit this one out. We don't want to ruin the flow. Clarissa smirked. It was a victory lap of a smile. See, even Daddy agrees, she said. She reached over to a pile of equipment the photographer had set down. She picked up a large circular silver reflector disc. It was used to bounce light onto the subjects. Here, Clarissa said, shoving the disc into my hands. If you really want to help make yourself useful, go stand over there behind the camera and hold this. Angle the light onto my face. At least that way your dark skin won't be in the frame, but you can still contribute to my glow. She laughed. Hunter laughed. My mother giggled into her mimosa. I stood there holding the silver disc. The metal frame felt cold against my palms. I looked at the photographer. He looked down at his shoes, ashamed to be witnessing this, but too afraid of losing the paycheck to speak up. I looked at my father. He was deliberately adjusting his sunglasses so he didn't have to make eye contact with me. That was it. That was the moment the last tether snapped. The final thread of loyalty I had been holding on to for 32 years disintegrated in the South Carolina sun. I did not throw the reflector disc. I did not scream. I did not cry. I gently placed the disc on the ground. Okay, I said. My voice was so calm it sounded like it belonged to a stranger. I understand perfectly. I would hate to ruin the balance. I turned around. Where are you going? Clarissa called out. We need that light. I am going to fix the lighting, I said without looking back, permanently. I walked back into the house. The air conditioning hit my skin, cooling the heat of the betrayal. I walked past the living room with the shattered statue. I walked past the kitchen with the spilled lobster stain. I walked down the long hallway to a nondescript door near the library. It was locked with a biometric scanner. I placed my thumb on the pad. The lock beeped green. I stepped inside. This was the server room, the brain of the Sapphire legacy. The walls were lined with racks of blinking servers humming with the power of a small data center. This wasn't just a smart home. It was a fortress controlled by enterprise-grade technology. I sat down at the main terminal. The 3 monitors flickered to life, bathing my face in a cool blue glow. I pulled up the master control interface. On the screen, I saw the live feed of the patio. I watched my family grouping together, smiling their fake smiles, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath them was about to shift. I opened the command line. I typed in a sequence of codes I had written 3 months ago, a script I named Protocol 0. This script did not just turn off the lights, it revoked everything. It would sever the internet connection. It would lock the electronic gates. It would disable the garage doors. It would shut down the water heaters. It would trigger the silent alarm that alerted the private security firm that unauthorized squatters were on the premises. And finally, it would cast the unauthorized user notification to every smart screen in the house. I looked at the screen one last time. I saw my father putting his arm around Hunter. I saw my mother fixing Clarissa's hair. They looked so happy. They looked so comfortable in a house they did not own, spending money they did not have, insulting the woman who held their fate in her hands. I hovered my finger over the enter key. "You wanted a reflector, Clarissa," I whispered. "Here is a reflection of your reality." I pressed the button. Execute. The glow of the monitors was the only light in the server room, casting a cool blue reflection across my face. I felt like a pilot in a cockpit, or perhaps a judge sitting high on a bench, looking down at the accused. On the main screen, the high-definition security feed showed the patio in crisp detail. My family was still out there posing like royalty. My sister Clarissa had finally gotten the photographer to agree to her vision. She was standing in the center holding a glass of champagne, flanked by her children, who looked miserable in their stiff, starched white linens. My mother Beatrice was tilting her head to the side, trying to hide her double chin. Hunter had his arm around my father, laughing at some joke that was probably at my expense. They looked picture perfect. They looked like the American dream, funded by credit card debt and lies. I took a sip of my water. My hand hovered over the keyboard. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and messy. What I felt now was the cold precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. I looked at the command line on my screen. Protocol 0 was loaded. But I decided to start with something a little more theatrical. I wanted to ruin the aesthetic they cared so much about. I opened the irrigation control subsystem. The estate had a commercial-grade sprinkler system, designed to keep the expansive lawns green during the scorching South Carolina summers. But because of the storm yesterday, the ground was already saturated. The flower beds surrounding the patio were essentially pits of mud. I selected the zones bordering the stone terrace. I set the pressure to maximum. "Smile for the camera," I whispered. I pressed enter. On the screen, chaos erupted instantly. 12 industrial sprinkler heads popped up from the ground simultaneously. They didn't just miss the grass. They blasted high-pressure jets of water directly onto the patio. It was glorious. The water hit the saturated soil first, churning it up instantly, before spraying a thick, heavy mixture of brown sludge into the air. I watched as a wave of mud hit Clarissa squarely in the chest. Her pristine white jumpsuit, the one she claimed cost $2,000, turned brown in a heartbeat. She screamed a sound so shrill I could hear it faintly through the soundproof walls of the server room. She dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the stone. Hunter tried to run, but leather loafers have zero traction on wet limestone. He slipped his arms, flailing like a windmill, and went down hard. He landed face first in a puddle of muddy water. My mother was frantically trying to shield her hair with her hands, but the sprinklers were oscillating, catching her from every angle. The photographer, to his credit, was smarter than them. He grabbed his expensive camera gear and sprinted for cover under the awning, leaving my family to face the deluge alone. "Get inside! Get inside!" I watched Hunter mouth the words, scrambling to his feet. They stampeded toward the French doors, slipping and sliding, dragging mud and water into the main salon. They looked like a pack of drowned rats. The white linen, the silk, the lace, it was all ruined. The aesthetic was officially destroyed. I leaned back in my chair. Phase 1 was complete. Now for the isolation. I switched tabs to the network administration panel. The Sapphire Legacy was built like a bunker. The walls were thick concrete and steel, reinforced to withstand hurricanes. This meant that cell service inside the house was non-existent. The only way to communicate with the outside world was through the house's mesh Wi-Fi network. I could see the activity logs spiking. Clarissa was already on her phone. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to go live on Instagram. She wanted to cry to her followers, to spin the narrative that the rental property was defective, to garner sympathy, and probably fish for a refund or a lawsuit. "Not today, sis," I said. I selected the option, disable all uplinks. I confirmed the action. On the screen, the data throughput dropped to 0. I switched cameras to the interior view of the living room. Clarissa was standing in the middle of the room, dripping wet, tapping furiously on her phone. She held it up in the air, walking in circles. Why is it not loading? I saw her scream at Hunter. It says no connection. I need to post this. I need to tag the rental company and sue them. Hunter pulled out his phone, too. He looked at it, shook it, then looked at the modem lights blinking red in the corner. The internet is down, Hunter yelled. The storm must have knocked it out. He was wrong, of course. The storm had passed hours ago. I was the storm now. Hunter wiped mud from his eyes. He looked panic-stricken. Without the internet, he couldn't check his crypto accounts. He couldn't move money around to hide it from the creditors I knew were circling him. I need to go to town, Hunter said, pacing. I need a signal. I have to make a call. He grabbed his keys from the table and ran toward the garage. I watched him go on the monitor. I waited until he was inside the garage bay. The camera showed him getting into his Range Rover. He started the engine. The brake lights flared red. He hit the button on his visor to open the garage door. Nothing happened. He hit it again. Nothing. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel. He got out of the car and went to the wall-mounted keypad. He punched in the code. Nothing. I had disabled the garage door openers. And because the heavy hurricane-proof doors were locked with electronic deadbolts, there was no way to lift them manually from the inside without the override key. And the override key. It was sitting on the desk right next to my left hand. Hunter kicked the garage door. He was trapped. His precious Range Rover, the symbol of his fake wealth, was now just a shiny metal box in a concrete cage. I turned my attention back to the living room. My mother was shivering. I am freezing, Beatrice whined. I need a hot shower. This is unacceptable. She headed toward the downstairs bathroom. I allowed her to enter. I waited until she turned the handle. Then I accessed the water heater controls. I cut the power to the heating elements, but I didn't stop there. I routed the water supply directly from the municipal main, bypassing the warming tank entirely. The water coming out of those pipes would be 55 degrees. I didn't have a camera in the bathroom, obviously, but I didn't need one. 30 seconds later, I heard a shriek that rivaled Clarissa's earlier scream. Beatrice burst out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, looking blue. There is no hot water, she screamed. It is ice cold. They were gathered in the living room now, wet, muddy, freezing, and disconnected from the world. The panic was setting in. They weren't just annoyed anymore, they were scared. They realized that the house wasn't just malfunctioning, it felt like the house was attacking them. Hunter came back from the garage defeated. The doors won't open, he panted. We are stuck. We can't get the cars out. What do you mean we are stuck? Clarissa yelled, throwing her useless phone on the couch. Call the police! I can't, Hunter shouted back. No signal. They stood there in a circle of misery. The silence in the house was heavy. They looked around waiting for something else to break, for the roof to cave in, for the floor to open up. I decided the silence was too boring. They needed a soundtrack for their eviction. I opened the Sonos media controller. It was connected to every speaker in the house, ceiling-mounted units in every room, including the living room where they huddled. I scrolled through the library. I found the perfect track. I set the volume to 100%, not 80, not 90, 100. I put it on repeat. I pressed play. The opening horn blast of Ray Charles's voice exploded through the house like a bomb. Hit the road. Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Clarissa covered her ears. Hunter looked up at the ceiling, his eyes wide with terror. My mother looked around wildly, as if the ghost of Nana Rose herself was singing to them. The music was deafening. It vibrated the floorboards. It shook the windows, hit the road. Jack, and don't you come back no more. I sat in the cool blue light of the server room, watching them scream at each other over the music, trying to figure out what was happening. I tapped my finger on the desk to the rhythm. Don't worry, family, I said to the screen. The show is just getting started. Wait until you see the bill. The living room of the Sapphire Legacy now smelled like a swamp. My family, who had looked so pristine in their white linens only 30 minutes ago, were now huddled together in the center of the Persian rug, shivering and dripping brown sludge onto the silk fibers. The air conditioning was still blasting at Arctic temperatures. The song hit the road. Jack had finally stopped playing, leaving a ringing silence that was almost worse than the noise. My mother Beatrice was wiping mud from her face with a decorative throw pillow, ruining yet another expensive item. Clarissa was crying, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks that mixed with the dirt. Hunter was pacing back and forth, leaving muddy footprints everywhere he stepped frantically, trying to get a signal on his phone to call for help. "This is a lawsuit," Hunter shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I am suing the rental agency. I am suing the landscaping company. I am suing the city for this water pressure. Do you know who I am? I will bankrupt this entire island." He was shouting at the walls. He was shouting at the furniture. He was a desperate man trying to assert control over a situation that had stripped him of all dignity. Suddenly, the room went dark. The overhead recessed lights flickered and died. Clarissa let out a sharp scream. "Oh God, now the power is out," she wailed. "We are going to die in here." But the power was not out. I had simply dimmed the lights to set the stage for my presentation. A low electronic hum filled the room. All eyes turned toward the fireplace. Mounted above the mantel was the 85-inch OLED television, a black monolith that dominated the wall. It flickered to life. The screen did not show a cable news channel. It did not show a Netflix menu. It showed a crisp white background with the logo of a company they did not recognize, Jacobs Asset Management. My mother stopped wiping her face. Hunter stopped pacing. They stared at the screen, confused. "What is that?" Clarissa whispered. "Is the TV hacked?" The screen transitioned. It was a PowerPoint slide. But this was not an amateur presentation. It was sleek, professional, and terrifyingly detailed. Slide 1 appeared. The header read, "Invoice for unauthorized occupancy, holiday rate." Below it, a bullet point appeared with a satisfying digital chime. "Item luxury oceanfront estate rental. Date December 24th to December 25th. Rate peak holiday surge pricing. Subtotal $25,000. Hunter squinted at the screen. His jaw dropped. "25,000, he sputtered. "That is insane. We are not paying that. Mom, did you book this place?" "Who sent this?" Before Beatrice could answer, the slide changed. Slide 2. The header read, "Penalty fees, violation of community standards." A list of charges scrolled down the screen, each one punctuating the silence in the room. Violation 1. Excessive noise pollution. Description: screaming, aggressive behavior, and disturbing the peace in a residential zone. Fine $5,000. Violation 2. Destruction of property. Description: broken obsidian sculpture, stained Persian rugs, mud damage to limestone patio. Fine $12,500. Clarissa gasped. "That statue again," she hissed. "Who is watching us? Is there a hidden camera?" Hunter looked around wildly, scanning the corners of the ceiling. "Show yourself," he yelled. "This is illegal surveillance." The slide changed again. Slide 3. This was the one I had enjoyed writing the most. The header read, "Specialized cleaning fees. Item removal of biohazardous waste." Description: deep cleaning required to remove traces of toxic entitlement, arrogance, and muddy footwear from the premises. Fine: $2,000. My mother read the screen. Her face turned purple. "Toxic entitlement," she screeched. "How dare they? We are the victims here. We were attacked by the sprinklers." The screen flashed red. A grand total appeared at the bottom, blinking in bold, angry letters. Total amount due immediately: $44,500. Hunter laughed. It was a hysterical, broken sound. "I am not paying a dime," he announced, crossing his muddy arms. "This is a prank. It has to be Amara. Where is she? Where is that useless girl? She probably set this up. Amara. Get out here." As if on cue, the screen changed one last time. The background turned black. White text appeared, typing itself out slowly, letter by letter, like a digital typewriter. Payment method, wire transfer only. Then a countdown timer appeared in the center of the screen. It started at 10 minutes and 0 seconds. The numbers began to tick down. 9:59, 9:58. Below the timer, a final message flashed in red strobe light effect. Settlement required within 10 minutes. Failure to comply will result in immediate eviction by law enforcement. Note: the sheriff is already parked at the gate. The room erupted into chaos. 10 minutes, Clarissa shrieked. Hunter, do something. Pay them. I don't want to go to jail. I can't pay them. Hunter yelled back, his facade finally cracking completely. I don't have $44,000 liquid right now. My accounts are... They are tied up. Tied up? Beatrice asked, her voice trembling. What do you mean tied up? You just bought a Birkin bag yesterday. It was credit. Hunter screamed, turning on her. It was all credit, and the cards are dead. I sat in the server room watching them turn on each other. The timer on the screen ticked down to 9 minutes. The truth was finally coming out, forced into the light by a simple invoice. I leaned into the microphone that was connected to the room's intercom system. I pressed the talk button. My voice boomed through the overhead speakers, godlike and distorted by the bass. "TikTok family," I said. "I do not accept American Express." Clarissa looked up at the ceiling, her eyes wide with horror. "Amara," she whispered. I released the button and sat back. The countdown continued. 8 minutes remaining. The eviction was ahead of schedule. The timer on the 85-inch television screen was ticking down. 7 minutes, 6 minutes. The red numbers pulsed like a heartbeat, casting a bloody glow over the panic-stricken faces of my family. Hunter was shouting into his cell phone, pacing back and forth in his muddy shoes, slipping slightly on the wet Persian rug with every turn. He had finally managed to get a signal by standing directly next to the window, and he was making the most of it. "Yes, 911, I need immediate assistance at the Sapphire Legacy estate." Hunter screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "We are being held hostage." "Yes, you heard me. It is a cyber attack. Someone has hacked the smart home system. They have locked us inside. They are extorting us for money." He paused, listening to the operator, then glared at me, sitting calmly in the shadows. "Who is doing it?" "It is a squatter. Her name is Amara Jacobs. She is a mentally unstable relative who broke in. She is dangerous. She has access to the electrical grid. I need a SWAT team. I need everything you have got." I took a sip of my water, watching him lie. He was good at it. It was second nature to him. He was spinning a narrative where he was the victim, the wealthy homeowner under siege by the jealous poor sister-in-law. My mother Beatrice was huddled on the sofa, clutching her chest. "Tell them to hurry, Hunter," she wailed. "My heart. I think I am having palpitations. This stress is going to kill me. And tell them to bring blankets. It is freezing in here." Hunter hung up the phone and pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are finished, Amara." He spat, a twisted smile forming on his lips. "You think you are so smart with your little computer tricks? The police are on their way. Sheriff Davis plays golf with your father. He knows this family. When he gets here, you are going to be arrested for extortion, trespassing, and grand larceny. You will be lucky if you get out of prison before you are 50. Clarissa looked up, hope returning to her eyes. "Is Davis coming?" she asked. "Oh, thank God. He came to my sweet 16 party. He loves us." "Amara, you should just unlock the doors now and apologize. Maybe Hunter won't press charges if you admit you were just jealous." I didn't say a word. I just pointed at the screen. 4 minutes. The silence that followed was thick with tension. The only sound was the dripping of water from their clothes and the hum of the server cooling fans in the distance. Hunter stood by the door, adjusting his wet collar, trying to look presentable for his saviors. He wiped the mud off his face with his sleeve. He was preparing his speech. He was ready to charm his way out of this just like he had charmed his way into my family's bank accounts. Then we saw it. Blue and red lights flashed through the sheer curtains, illuminating the rain that was still falling outside. The siren wailed a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the storm. "He is here," Hunter shouted triumphantly. "Game over, Amara." He ran to the front door. Since I had not unlocked it yet, he pounded on the wood. "In here." "We are in here." "Help." I picked up my tablet. I tapped the command to disengage the magnetic locks on the front entry. The heavy oak doors clicked open. Hunter threw them wide. He stepped back, putting on his best performance of a traumatized victim. "Officer, thank God you are here," Hunter panted, gesturing wildly toward me. "It has been a nightmare. That woman over there, she is the intruder. She hacked the house. She is demanding $40,000. Arrest her immediately." Into the foyer stepped Sheriff Davis. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. He was a black man in his 50s with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen everything. He shook the rain off his raincoat and stepped into the house, his boots thudding heavily on the marble. Two deputies stood behind him, hands resting on their belts. Hunter rushed forward to shake his hand, assuming the camaraderie of shared status. "Sheriff Davis." "Good to see you again," Hunter said, putting on his fake charming voice. "I know it has been a while, but you remember me, right? Hunter Montgomery, Luther's son-in-law. We met at the country club. Look, I am sorry to drag you out in this weather, but this situation is critical." Sheriff Davis looked at Hunter's extended hand. He did not take it. He looked at Hunter's muddy clothes. He looked at the water-damaged floors. He looked at the shattered remains of the obsidian statue in the living room. Then he looked past Hunter as if he were made of glass. Sheriff Davis walked straight into the living room. He bypassed my shivering mother. He ignored Clarissa, who was trying to smile flirtatiously through her mascara tears. He walked directly to where I was sitting. He took off his hat and held it against his chest. "Good evening, Ms. Jacobs." Sheriff Davis said, his voice deep and respectful. I stood up and nodded. "Good evening, Sheriff. Thank you for coming so quickly." Hunter froze. He turned around slowly, his face a mask of confusion. "Ms. Jacobs," Hunter stammered. "Sheriff, wait. You have got it wrong. She is the intruder. I am the... Well, my in-laws are the owners. She is just the help. She is the one causing the disturbance." Sheriff Davis turned slowly to face Hunter. His expression was not friendly. It was the look of a man who had no patience for foolishness. "Mr. Montgomery," Sheriff Davis said, his voice cold, "I suggest you lower your voice. You are currently standing on private property, and the owner has filed a formal complaint against you for destruction of assets and unauthorized occupancy." Hunter laughed nervously. "The owner? Yeah, I know. Luther and Beatrice. They are right here. Ask them. They will tell you Amara is crazy." Sheriff Davis reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick folded document bound in a blue legal cover. He unfolded it with deliberate slowness. "I do not need to ask anyone, Mr. Montgomery. I was the witness to the last will and testament of Mrs. Nana Rose Jacobs 3 years ago." He held the document up. Even from across the room, the gold seal of the notary was visible. 3 years ago, Beatrice squeaked from the sofa. But Nana didn't die until last year." "Exactly," Sheriff Davis said, looking at my mother with disappointment. "She changed her will 2 years before she passed. She was very specific about her reasons. She told me she wanted to ensure the legacy of this estate went to the only member of the family who actually respected it." He began to read from the document. "I, Nana Rose Jacobs, being of sound mind, do hereby leave the entirety of the estate known as the Sapphire Legacy, along with all contents, art collections, and the accompanying trust fund to my granddaughter Amara Jacobs." The room went silent. The only sound was the rain hitting the windows. Hunter blinked. What he whispered? Sheriff Davis continued reading. "To my son Luther and his wife Beatrice, I leave nothing, as they have already consumed more than their fair share of my patience and my wallet." To my granddaughter Clarissa, I leave my collection of vintage etiquette books in the hopes that she might one day learn some manners. I saw a flicker of a smile cross the sheriff's face before he returned to his professional demeanor. This deed is registered with the county, the state, and the bank, Davis said, closing the folder. Ms. Amara Jacobs is the sole owner. Fee, simple, absolute. Which means, Mr. Montgomery, that when she sets a rule, it is the law of the land. Hunter looked at me. His eyes were wide, panicked, searching for a lie that could save him. No, he said, shaking his head. That is fake. She forged it. She is a hacker, remember? She printed that out. Sheriff Davis took a step closer to Hunter. He placed a hand on his holster, not threateningly but authoritatively. I am the executor of the estate, son. I watched her sign it. Now Ms. Jacobs has informed me that you have caused approximately $50,000 in damages tonight. She has also informed me that you have refused to pay the settlement invoice. Hunter backed away, bumping into the wall. I don't have the money right now, Hunter stammered. Sheriff Davis nodded. I thought you might say that. Which brings us to the next problem. Since you cannot pay for the damage you caused during your criminal trespass, and since you have refused to vacate the premises when asked, you are now legally classified as an intruder. Hunter's face drained of all color. He looked like a ghost. Intruder, Hunter squeaked. But we are family. Not anymore, I said, speaking up for the first time. I walked over to stand next to Sheriff Davis. I looked at my sister, who was sobbing silently. I looked at my mother, who was staring at the floor in shame. And I looked at Hunter, the man who had called me a loser only hours ago. Family invites you to dinner, Hunter, I said softly. Intruders break things, and right now you are trespassing in my house. I turned to the sheriff. Sheriff, I would like them removed. Immediately. Sheriff Davis nodded. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. You heard the Lady, Davis said to Hunter. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. But either way, you are leaving this house. And since I just ran your license plates on the way in, Mr. Montgomery, I think you and I need to have a long conversation about some outstanding warrants for wire fraud in Georgia. Hunter's knees gave out. He slid down the wall, sliding into a puddle of muddy water. He looked up at me, begging with his eyes, but he found no mercy. The countdown timer on the TV screen hit 0. A loud buzzer sounded through the house. Time is up, I said. The silence in the living room was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The only sound was the relentless rhythm of the rain hammering against the hurricane-proof glass. Sheriff Davis stood with his arms crossed, a silent sentinel of justice, while my family stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. Hunter was pressed against the wall, his expensive Italian suit now smeared with mud, his chest heaving as he tried to process the fact that his legal immunity had just evaporated. But I was not done. The will was just the appetizer. I wanted to serve the main course. I walked back to the center of the room, my heels clicking on the marble floor with a sound that echoed like a gavel striking a block. I held my tablet in my hand like a weapon. You know, Hunter? I said, keeping my voice conversational, almost bored. You said something earlier that really stuck with me. You told my father that you could double his retirement portfolio. You said you knew where the lions eat. Hunter flinched. He looked at Luther, then back at me. Shut up, Amara, Hunter hissed. Don't listen to her, Luther. She is trying to confuse you. I ignored him. I swiped my finger across the tablet screen. The massive 85-inch television mounted above the fireplace flickered. The invoice for the damages disappeared, replaced by a new slide. The background was stark white. In the center was a scanned image of an email. The logo at the top belonged to a prestigious investment firm in Atlanta, the one where Hunter claimed he was a senior partner. I read the text aloud, my voice clear and precise. To Mr. Hunter Montgomery, Subject: termination of employment for cause. Date: June 12, 2023. I paused to let the date sink in. That is 6 months ago, I noted. I continued reading. Dear Mr. Montgomery, following an internal audit, we have discovered significant irregularities in your expense accounts amounting to unauthorized personal spending of client funds. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. We are withholding your severance, pending a criminal investigation. Clarissa let out a gasp. She covered her mouth with her hands. June, she whispered. But, Hunter, in June you said you were going on a business trip to Tokyo. You were gone for 2 weeks. Hunter's face turned a sickly shade of gray. I was consulting, he stammered. It was freelance. I swiped the screen again. Slide 2 appeared. This was not an email. This was a bank statement. But not just any bank statement. It was a Vanguard Retirement Trust account statement. The name on the account was Luther and Beatrice Jenkins. My parents looked up at the screen. My father squinted, confused. That is my account, Luther said, his voice trembling. Why is my account on the screen? I used the laser pointer feature on my tablet to circle a series of transactions. Look closely, Dad, I said. November 1st, withdrawal, $50,000. Destination, Crypto Wallet X, 79, November 15th, withdrawal, $75,000. Destination, Offshore Holding Cayman Islands, December 1st, withdrawal, $75,000. Destination, DraftKings Sportsbook. I looked at my father. He was shaking. His face had gone pale, his lips moving soundlessly. Total amount withdrawn in the last 60 days, I announced. $200,000. The room spun. I could feel the oxygen being sucked out of the space. Hunter, my father whispered. He stood up, his legs wobbling. You told me you needed my signature to transfer the funds to a high-yield bond. You brought me the papers. I signed them because I trusted you. Hunter held up his hands, backing away. It is an investment, Luther, he shouted, desperate now. It is just a temporary liquidity move. The crypto market is down right now. But it is going to bounce back. I was going to pay you back double, I swear. DraftKings, I asked, raising an eyebrow. You invested their life savings in sports betting. Hunter looked at Clarissa. Baby, tell them I am good for it. Clarissa stared at him. The realization was dawning on her face. The designer bags, the vacations, the private school tuition. It wasn't funded by his success. It was funded by stealing from her own parents. You stole from them, Clarissa screamed. You told me you got a bonus. I did get a bonus, Hunter yelled back. I made it happen. I did what I had to do to keep you happy, Clarissa. You spend money like it is water. Do you think your little influencer lifestyle is cheap? My mother Beatrice let out a sound I had never heard before. It was a primal, animalistic wail of grief and rage. She stood up from the sofa. This was a woman who cared more about appearances than anything else, but $200,000 was not an appearance. It was her future. It was her security. You thief, Beatrice shrieked. She lunged at him. It happened so fast. My mother, usually so composed, flew across the room. She grabbed Hunter by the lapels of his muddy suit jacket and shook him. We trusted you, she screamed, spitting in his face. We treated you like a king. You ate at our table, you drove our cars, and you robbed us blind. Hunter tried to push her away, but Beatrice was fueled by the fury of a woman scorned. She scratched at his face. She slapped him hard, the sound cracking through the room like a whip. Get off me, you crazy old hag! Hunter shouted, shoving her backward. Beatrice stumbled and fell onto the sofa, sobbing hysterically. Luther clutched his chest, sinking back into his chair, looking like he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. I watched it all from my spot near the fireplace. I felt no pity. I only felt the cold satisfaction of justice. You stood there and called me a loser, Hunter, I said, my voice cutting through the sobbing. You made fun of my job. You made fun of my clothes. You tried to convince my father to cut me out of the family completely. I walked closer to him. He was breathing hard, backed into a corner, mud on his face, his tie crooked. But look at you now, I whispered. You are not a businessman. You are a parasite. You are a leech. Bo me nui ong tai au nui hijam nya. That is an old saying, Hunter. It means they raised a snake in their own bosom, and you just bit the hand that fed you. Hunter looked around the room. He saw Clarissa looking at him with disgust. He saw Luther looking at him with betrayal. He saw the sheriff watching him with anticipation. He realized he had no allies left. I have to go, Hunter muttered. He turned and bolted for the French doors leading to the patio. He thought he could run into the storm. He thought he could disappear into the night. Sheriff Davis did not even run. He simply took 2 large steps and blocked the path. Whoa there, son. Davis rumbled, his voice deep and dangerous. Hunter tried to dodge him, but Davis reached out a massive hand and grabbed Hunter by the shoulder. It looked effortless. He spun Hunter around and slammed him against the wall. Let me go, Hunter screamed. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Davis said calmly, pulling Hunter's arms behind his back. Hunter struggled, kicking his legs, but the sheriff clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists with a practiced motion. Hunter James Montgomery. Sheriff Davis announced, his voice filling the room. I have a warrant here from the FBI regarding wire fraud and identity theft across state lines. And now I am adding a few local charges for elder abuse and grand larceny. Hunter slumped against the wall, defeated. Wait, Hunter cried, tears mixing with the mud on his face. Please, it is a misunderstanding. I can fix it, Luther tell him. Tell him it was a loan. My father looked up. His eyes were red. He looked at the man he had idolized for years. Luther slowly shook his head. I don't know you, Luther whispered. Sheriff Davis yanked Hunter up by his collar. Cliffhanger. Ms. Jacobs, the sheriff said to me. Would you like me to remove the trash now? I looked at Hunter one last time. Yes, Sheriff, I said. And please make sure he doesn't stain the driveway on his way out. Hunter began to sob as he was dragged toward the front door. But the nightmare was not over for the rest of them. I turned my gaze to Clarissa and my parents. Don't get too comfortable, I said. I haven't shown you slide number 3 yet. The heavy oak door slammed shut, cutting off Hunter's pathetic cries for mercy. The sound echoed through the cavernous living room like a gunshot, signaling the end of one problem and the beginning of another. Sheriff Davis had done his part, dragging the trash to the curb, but the stench of betrayal still lingered in the air. I turned back to face the remnants of my family. My mother Beatrice was slumped on the sofa, her face buried in her hands, weeping for the loss of her retirement fund. My father Luther looked like a man who had just survived a stroke, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at the spot where his favorite son-in-law had just been arrested. But Clarissa was vibrating. She stood in the center of the room, her ruined white jumpsuit stained brown with mud, her hair a frizzy disaster. She wasn't crying anymore. She was furious. The shock had worn off, replaced by the cornered animal instinct that had kept her at the top of the family food chain for 35 years. You did this! Clarissa screamed, her voice cracking with rage. She pointed a manicured finger at me, shaking so hard her bracelets rattled. You planned this whole thing. You set him up. Hunter is innocent. He is a genius. You are just jealous because nobody has ever loved you the way he loves me. I stood perfectly still near the fireplace, holding my tablet. I watched her unravel. It was fascinating, really. Even now, with the truth staring her in the face, she clung to the delusion. He is not a genius, Clarissa, I said calmly. He is a felon. And he didn't love you. He loved your access to Mom and Dad's money. You are a liar, she shrieked. You are a bitter, lonely, hateful woman. You destroyed my family tonight. I hope you are happy. When this is over, I am going to sue you for everything you have. I am going to take this house, I am going to take your money, and I am going to make sure you rot in the street. I let her finish. I let her spew every ounce of venom she had stored up. When she finally stopped to gasp for air, I simply tapped the screen of my tablet. "I am not the one who destroyed this family, Clarissa," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "And I am definitely not the one who put Mom and Dad on the street." I swiped left. Slide number 3 appeared on the 85-inch television screen. This slide was different. It wasn't an email or a bank statement. It was a legal document from the Cook County Recorder of Deeds in Illinois. The header read, "Second Mortgage Lien. Notice of Default." Below it was a picture of a house. It was a beautiful 2-story brick home in a nice suburb of Chicago. It was the house I grew up in. It was the house my parents had lived in for 40 years. It was the house they claimed was fully paid off a decade ago. My father looked up at the screen. He squinted, confused. "That is our house," Luther whispered, wiping his eyes. "Why is there a picture of our house?" I walked over to the TV and pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the document. "Take a closer look at the date, Dad," I said. 2 years ago. Do you remember when Clarissa told you she needed you to sign some papers for her new business venture? She said it was just a character reference." Luther's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Clarissa. Clarissa went pale. She took a step back. "You signed a power of attorney, Dad." I continued, my voice merciless. "And do you know what your golden child did with that power? She took out a home equity line of credit on your paid-off house." I tapped the screen again. The numbers zoomed in. Total loan amount, $350,000. Current status default, 90 days past due. Foreclosure auction date, January 15th. The room went silent. Even the rain seemed to stop listening. Beatrice slowly lifted her head. She looked at the screen. She looked at the word foreclosure. "What does that mean?" Beatrice asked, her voice sounding like a child's. "It means, Mother, that you don't own that house anymore," I said brutally. "The bank owns it. And since Clarissa hasn't made a payment in 6 months, the bank is selling it in 3 weeks." Beatrice turned to Clarissa. Her eyes were not angry anymore. They were terrified. "Clarissa," Beatrice whispered, "tell me it isn't true. That is my home. That is where I raised you. You said the business was doing well. You said the brand was taking off." Clarissa began to stammer. She looked around the room for an exit, but there was nowhere to go. It was an investment." "Mom," Clarissa cried, her voice rising in pitch, "you have to understand. Being an influencer costs money. I needed inventory. I needed the trips to Dubai and Tulum. I needed to maintain the image. It takes money to make money. I was going to pay it back as soon as I got a brand deal with Sephora." "You gambled their house on a pipe dream?" I asked. "It is not a pipe dream," Clarissa shouted at me. "I am a public figure. I have 50,000 followers. I have a reputation to uphold." I laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound. "You have 50,000 bots, Clarissa," I corrected her. "And now you have homeless parents." I stepped closer to her. She tried to back away, but she bumped into the coffee table. "For years you called me useless," I said, staring deep into her eyes. "You told everyone I was the disappointment because I didn't have a husband or a shiny career you could brag about. You treated me like a doll you could dress up in your old clothes and toss in the corner." I gestured to our parents, who were now holding each other, weeping silently on the sofa. "But look at the scoreboard, Clarissa. You are not just a useless doll. You are a destructive one. You are a demolition ball in high heels." I pointed at the screen again. "Hunter stole their retirement. You stole their home. Between the two of you, you have stripped them of every single asset they spent 40 years building. They are not just broke, they are destitute. And it is entirely 100% thanks to you." Clarissa shook her head violently, covering her ears. "Stop it. Stop saying that. It is not my fault. I deserve to live a certain way. I am special. Mom said I was special." My mother stood up. She looked frail. The arrogance that had defined her for decades was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. She walked over to Clarissa. Clarissa braced herself, expecting a hug, expecting comfort. expecting her mother to say it was all okay, that they would figure it out. Instead, Beatrice raised her hand and slapped Clarissa across the face. It wasn't a sharp slap like the one she gave Hunter. It was a heavy, thudding blow of exhaustion and regret. "You lied to me," Beatrice sobbed. "You looked me in the eye and lied. I gave you everything. I ignored Amara for you. I gave you the best room. I gave you the best clothes. And you took my home." "Mom, please," Clarissa wept, holding her cheek. "I can fix it. I just need a little time." "You don't have time," I interrupted. I pulled out my phone. "I just forwarded the foreclosure notice to your email, Clarissa. But I imagine you won't be able to check it for much longer." Clarissa looked at me confused. "What, I happened to run a credit check on you too," I said, checking my nails. "You see, when the bank realized the house was underwater and your husband was under investigation for fraud, they triggered a universal default clause." I looked at her pocket. "Is your phone vibrating?" Clarissa froze. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her iPhone. The screen was lit up with a cascade of notifications. Text message from American Express. Text message from Chase Sapphire. Text message from Nordstrom Visa. She stared at the screen, her eyes scanning the messages. "Your card ending in 4098 has been closed by the issuer. Your card ending in 5521 has been suspended. Your credit line has been revoked immediately." The phone dinged again, and again, and again. It was a symphony of financial ruin. Clarissa tapped frantically on the screen. "No, no, no," she screamed. "They can't do this. How am I supposed to get home? How am I supposed to feed the kids?" I walked over to the door and opened it wide. The rain was still pouring, but the wind had died down. "That sounds like a personal problem," I said. "My credit?" Clarissa wailed, looking up at me with mascara running down her face. "They ruined my credit. I am a 750. "You were a 750, I corrected. "As of 30 seconds ago, you are a 400. You can't even rent a Blockbuster Video, let alone an apartment." I looked at my parents, then at Clarissa. "The bank owns the house in Chicago. I own this house. And neither of us is running a shelter for people who bite the hand that feeds them." I pointed outside. "Sheriff Davis is waiting to escort the rest of the intruders off the property. I suggest you start walking." Clarissa looked at her phone one last time. It went black. The battery had died, just like her lifestyle. Cliffhanger. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. "You think you have won?" Clarissa hissed. "You think this makes you better than me?" "You are still alone, Amara. You will always be alone." I smiled, taking a sip of my water. "Better alone in a mansion," I said, "than together in a cardboard box. Get out." The storm outside was finally beginning to lose its rage, but inside the living room of the Sapphire Legacy, the devastation was complete. The air felt heavy, charged with the static of ruined lives and shattered egos. My sister Clarissa sat slumped on the floor in her muddy white jumpsuit, staring blankly at her dead phone, a modern-day queen dethroned by her own credit score. My parents, Luther and Beatrice, held on to each other on the sofa like two shipwreck survivors clinging to a piece of driftwood, their eyes red from crying over a house they no longer owned and a retirement fund that had been gambled away on sports bets. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. The sound broke the silence like a thunderclap. He stepped forward, his heavy boots making a dull thud on the marble. In his large, calloused hands, he held the blue leather folder containing the last will and testament of Nana Rose. He did not hand it to my father. He did not hand it to my mother. He walked past them with the indifference of a man who knew exactly who the villain was in this story. He stopped in front of me and held out the folder with both hands, a gesture of profound respect. "I think you should read the final paragraph," Ms. Jacobs Davis said softly. "It is the part she wrote by hand right before she passed. She made me promise that one day, if it ever came to this, I would make sure they heard it." I took the folder. The leather was cool and smooth against my skin. It smelled like lavender and old paper, the signature scent of my grandmother. I ran my fingers over the gold lettering on the cover. I felt a lump form in my throat, not of sadness, but of vindication. Nana Rose had been the only one who saw me. She was the only one who looked past my dark skin and saw a human being worthy of love. I opened the document. The pages crinkled in the silence. I walked to the center of the room, standing directly beneath the chandelier. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to hear every syllable. I began to read, my voice starting out quiet, but growing stronger with every word. To my granddaughter Amara, I began. My mother looked up, flinching at the sound of my name. I leave this estate and the entirety of my fortune not out of obligation, but out of justice, I read. For 30 years I have watched in silence as my son Luther and his wife Beatrice committed the slow, quiet sin of erasure. I watched them push Amara into the shadows because her skin was too dark for their vanity. I watched them fawn over Clarissa because she fit their image of perfection. Clarissa let out a choked sob. She didn't write that, Clarissa whispered. She loved me. I was her favorite. I kept reading, raising my voice to drown out her delusion. They thought I was blind, the will continued. They thought because I was old, I did not see the way Amara was made to sit at the kids' table long after she was grown. They thought I did not see the way they forgot to invite her to Christmas year after year, claiming it was an accident. It was never an accident. It was cruelty disguised as forgetfulness. I looked at my father. Luther was weeping openly now, his head bowed, unable to meet my gaze. I leave this house to Amara, I read, because she is the only one who knows what it means to build a home. She is the only one who works while the others pose. She is the only one who loved me without asking for a check. And to the rest of you, I leave a lesson. You spent your lives chasing status, worshipping the false god of appearance. Now you will learn that status cannot be inherited, and appearance cannot keep you warm when the doors are locked. I closed the folder. The sound was final, like a coffin lid slamming shut. I looked at them, really looked at them. For the first time in my life, I did not see giants. I did not see the powerful parents who controlled my self-esteem. I did not see the glamorous big sister who made me feel ugly. I saw three small, pathetic people who had built their lives on sand. My mother Beatrice reached out a trembling hand toward me. "Amara, baby," she croaked. Her voice was thin and raspy. Nana was... she was old. She was confused at the end. She didn't mean to be so harsh. "We are your family. We made mistakes, yes, but we can fix this. We can start over. You have this big house now. There is plenty of room. We can stay in the guest wing. We can be a real family again." I stared at her hand. It was the same hand that had thrown the car keys at me 3 hours ago. It was the same hand that had slapped Clarissa only moments ago. A real family, I repeated, letting the words roll around in my mouth. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the poker. I poked the dying embers of the fire where I had burned the expired coupons and the dirty underwear. "You know, Mother," I said, turning back to face them. "For 15 years, I waited by the phone every December. I checked my email every day. I told myself that maybe this year you would remember me. Maybe this year I would be worthy of a seat at the table." I walked toward the French doors that led to the patio. The rain was still falling, a steady, cleansing downpour. "I realized something tonight," I said. "You didn't forget me. You erased me. You made me an outsider in my own bloodline because I didn't match your aesthetic. I was the dark spot in your perfect white picture." I unlocked the deadbolt on the French doors. The mechanism clicked loudly. Clarissa scrambled to her feet. "What are you doing?" Clarissa asked, panic rising in her voice. "Amara, it is pouring rain out there." I threw the doors open. A gust of wind blew into the room, carrying the scent of wet earth and salt spray. The curtains billowed wildly. The temperature in the room dropped instantly. 15 years ago, you decided I was not family," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You decided I was a stranger." I pointed a finger toward the dark, wet driveway. "So tonight I am finally giving you what you wanted. I am accepting your decision. I am a stranger. And strangers do not let freeloaders sleep in their multi-million-dollar estate. Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls. You are kicking us out. In a storm. On Christmas Eve I smiled. It was a smile devoid of warmth. I am not kicking you out, Mother. I am simply correcting a clerical error. You are unauthorized occupants. I stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. Get out, I commanded. Clarissa ran to Luther, grabbing his arm. Dad, do something. She can't do this. Luther looked at me. He looked at the open door. He looked at the sheriff standing behind me with his hand on his belt. Luther stood up shakily. He didn't look at Clarissa. He looked at me. She won. Clarissa, Luther whispered. She holds all the cards. Luther began to walk toward the door. He moved like an old man defeated and broken. Beatrice followed him, sobbing into her hands. Clarissa stood alone in the center of the room. She looked at the luxury she was losing. She looked at the warmth of the fire. She looked at me. I hate you, Clarissa hissed. I laughed. I know, I said, but you will have plenty of time to think about that while you wait for a taxi. Uber doesn't pick up during hurricanes. Clarissa let out a scream of frustration and stomped out into the rain, her white jumpsuit immediately soaking up the water. My parents followed her, stepping into the mud, their expensive shoes ruined. I stood in the doorway, watching them huddled together under the portico, shivering, broken, and homeless. Sheriff Davis walked up beside me. Do you want me to call them a cab? Ms. Jacobs, he asked. I looked at my watch. No, Sheriff, I said. Let them wait. I hear the fresh air is good for the complexion. I reached out and grabbed the brass handles of the double doors. Merry Christmas, I whispered. And then I slammed the doors shut. The flashing blue lights of the police cruiser painted the wet driveway in a chaotic rhythm of strobe effects. It was a harsh industrial light that stripped away any remaining illusion of grandeur from the sapphire legacy. The estate no longer looked like a holiday postcard. It looked like a crime scene, which, thanks to my brother-in-law, it technically was. I stood in the dry sanctuary of the foyer, watching through the open front door as Sheriff Davis escorted Hunter down the steps. Hunter was not walking with the swagger of the finance mogul he pretended to be. He was hunched over, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, shuffling awkwardly in his muddy loafers. He was muttering to himself, a stream of frantic, nonsensical legal jargon about jurisdiction and phone calls, but nobody was listening. One of the deputies placed a hand on top of Hunter's head to guide him into the back of the cruiser. It was a humiliating gesture, the universal sign of a man who has lost control of his own body. Hunter looked back at the house one last time. He saw me standing in the doorway, bathed in the warm, golden light of the chandelier. Our eyes met. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to beg, perhaps to curse me, but the deputy slammed the car door shut, sealing him inside a cage of reinforced glass and steel. The cruiser's engine roared to life. The siren chirped once, a sharp sound that signaled the end of the show. As the police car pulled away, taking the family's golden goose to the county jail, a heavy silence descended on the three people left standing on the porch. My mother Beatrice, my father Luther, and my sister Clarissa stood clustered together under the portico. They looked like refugees from a sunken ship. Their expensive white clothes were ruined, stained brown with mud and soaked through with rain. Their hair was plastered to their skulls. Clarissa wiped her nose with the back of her hand. She looked at the retreating taillights of the police car. Then she turned her fury toward the garage. "We are leaving!" she announced, her voice trembling with cold and rage. "I am not staying here another second. Where are the car keys?" She marched toward the garage bay, where the family's fleet of luxury SUVs was parked. Hunter's Range Rover, her Porsche Cayenne, and my father's Escalade were all safely tucked inside. She went to the wall-mounted keypad and punched in the code furiously. Nothing happened. The heavy hurricane-proof doors remained sealed shut. "Open it!" Clarissa screamed, pounding her fist against the metal. Amara. "Open the garage." I stepped out onto the porch. I stayed under the overhang, keeping perfectly dry. "I cannot do that, Clarissa," I said calmly. "Why not?" she shrieked, spinning around to face me. "You kicked us out! We are leaving! Give us our cars!" I pointed to the driveway where Sheriff Davis had stopped his truck before leaving with Hunter. He had left a deputy behind a young officer who was currently placing bright orange stickers on the garage door. "The cars are not yours to take," I explained. "Since Hunter used the vehicles as collateral for the fraudulent loans he took out in Dad's name, and since the bank has already issued a repossession order, which I kindly forwarded to the local towing company, those cars are legally frozen assets." My father Luther let out a low moan. He leaned against a stone pillar for support. "My truck," Luther whispered. "Even my truck." "Especially your truck, Dad," I said. "Hunter put it under the shell company he used to launder the money. It is evidence now. You cannot drive evidence out of a crime scene." Clarissa stared at the garage door. She looked at her Porsche visible through the small glass window, at the top tantalizingly close but completely unreachable. "So how are we supposed to leave, Clarissa?" asked her voice, rising to a panic. "We can't stay here and we can't drive." I shrugged. "I suppose you will have to walk to the main gate," I said. "It is only a quarter of a mile." "Walk!" Beatrice gasped. "In this storm." With our luggage, I looked at the pile of Louis Vuitton suitcases they had dragged out of the house. They were heavy, overstuffed trunks filled with the outfits they had planned to wear to impress their friends. "I suggest you start moving," I said. "The automatic gate locks in 20 minutes. If you are not on the other side by then, you will be trapped in the yard with the guard dogs." "We don't have dogs," Clarissa shouted. I smiled. "I hired a private security firm this morning," I lied. "They have dogs. Big ones." It was a bluff, of course, but fear is a powerful motivator. Clarissa grabbed the handle of her massive suitcase. She yanked it. The wheels skidded in the mud that covered the driveway. "I hate you," she muttered. She began to drag the heavy bag down the driveway. Her high heels sank into the soft, wet earth with every step. She stumbled, twisting her ankle, but she kept going, fueled by pure adrenaline and humiliation. My parents followed her. Luther carried 2 duffel bags, his back bent under the weight. Beatrice, who had not carried her own luggage since the 1990s, was forced to drag a rolling carry-on that bounced and rattled over the cobblestones. I watched them go. It was a pathetic procession. The wind whipped at their clothes. The rain beat down on their heads. They slipped and slid, cursing the mud, cursing the weather, and cursing me. I turned and walked back inside the house. I went up the grand staircase, my hand gliding along the smooth mahogany railing. I walked down the hall to the master suite, the room Clarissa had tried to kick me out of earlier. I walked out onto the private balcony. The balcony was covered, protected from the storm. I leaned against the railing, looking down at the driveway below. From this height they looked small. They looked insignificant. I could see the beams of their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they trudged toward the iron gates at the end of the property. I raised a pair of binoculars to my eyes. They had reached the gate. They were pushing their luggage through the opening just as the heavy iron bars began to slowly close. They scrambled through, terrified of being locked in. Now they were standing on the public road. It was pitch black. There were no streetlights on this part of the island. I saw Clarissa pull out her phone. The screen lit up her wet face. I could see her tapping furiously. Then she shook the phone. Then she tapped again. I knew exactly what she was seeing. No cars available. Due to the severe weather warning, ride-share services like Uber and Lyft had suspended operations on the island. And even if they were running, Clarissa's credit cards had been declined. She couldn't even pay for a shared ride. I watched as she made a phone call. She was calling a local taxi dispatch. I could imagine the conversation. A 3-hour wait time. Cash only. My mother sat down on her suitcase by the side of the road. She pulled her wet fur coat tight around her, shivering violently. My father stood staring into the darkness, a man who had lost his fortune, his home, and his dignity in a single night. They looked like strangers. And in that moment I realized that was exactly what they were. They were just people I used to know. I lowered the binoculars. I turned back to the room. On the bedside table sat the bottle of Petrus wine I had opened earlier. I poured the last glass. The rich dark red liquid swirled in the crystal. I walked back to the railing and held the glass up to the storm. To new beginnings, I whispered. I took a sip. The wine was complex, bold, and incredibly satisfying. Below me in the dark, a taxi horn finally honked in the distance, a faint, sad sound that was swallowed by the wind. But up here on the balcony of my estate, everything was dry, everything was warm, and for the first time in my life, everything was mine. 6 months is a long time in the real world, but it is an eternity when you are watching your life fall apart from behind a plexiglass window. I stood on the balcony of the Sapphire Legacy, looking out at the calm summer ocean. The storm that had raged on Christmas Eve was just a memory now washed away by the tides, much like the people who had caused it. The estate had changed. I had removed the white marble statues my mother loved so much. I had replaced the cold museum-like furniture with warm velvet sofas and vibrant art from local black artists. The house no longer felt like a mausoleum for the ego. It felt like a home. Inside, the sound of genuine laughter drifted through the French doors. It was a stark contrast to the performative giggling of my sister and the boastful shouting of my brother-in-law. Tonight was not a holiday, but we were celebrating anyway. We were celebrating the 6-month anniversary of the day I officially took back my life. I took a sip of iced tea and thought about where the rest of the cast of this tragedy was right now. Hunter was currently residing in a 6-by-8-foot cell at the Federal Correctional Institution in Jesup, Georgia. It turned out that the FBI takes wire fraud very seriously, especially when you cross state lines. He had pleaded guilty to avoid a 10-year sentence, accepting a plea deal for 5 years. I heard through the grapevine that he was working in the prison laundry folding sheets for 12 cents an hour. I imagined his soft manicured hands, the hands that used to hold expensive cigars and steal from my father's retirement fund, now raw and chapped from industrial detergent. It was a fitting career change. Clarissa had avoided prison, but she was living in her own personal hell. The bank had foreclosed on her home in Atlanta within 30 days. She had lost the Porsche, the designer clothes, and her 50,000 fake Instagram followers. Today, Clarissa was working the checkout lane at a discount grocery store in a rough part of Savannah. I pictured her standing there in a polyester vest that was 2 sizes too big, scanning coupons for customers who yelled at her when they expired. The irony was delicious. The woman who had mocked me for using coupons was now professionally obligated to accept them. She was living in a studio apartment above a laundromat, sharing a single room with her 2 children because she could not afford anything else. Her hands, once perfectly manicured, were now bare. Her aesthetic was gone. She was just another face in the crowd, invisible and ordinary, which for a narcissist like Clarissa was a fate worse than death. And then there were my parents, Luther and Beatrice. They had not been able to salvage anything. With the house in Chicago sold to pay off Clarissa's debts and the retirement fund emptied by Hunter, they were destitute. They were too old to restart their careers, but too broke to retire. My father, a man who used to look down on service workers, was now working as a night security guard at a shopping mall. He spent 8 hours a night walking on swollen feet, guarding things he could no longer afford to buy. My mother was working as a greeter at a wholesale warehouse club, checking receipts at the door, forcing a smile for strangers because she needed the minimum wage to pay for their heating bill. They had traded their dignity for an image, and in the end they lost both. "Babe, are you coming inside?" I turned around. Marcus was standing in the doorway. He was tall, with kind eyes and a smile that made me feel safe. He was an architect I had hired to help renovate the guest wing, and unlike my family, he didn't care about my money. He cared about my mind. He walked over and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Everyone is waiting for the toast," Marcus whispered. I leaned back into him. "I am coming," I said. I was just enjoying the view. We walked back into the living room. It was filled with my friends, my chosen family. There was my lawyer, the one who helped me execute the eviction. There was the photographer from that fateful morning who I had hired to shoot my new branding photos. There were my old college roommates who had stuck by me when I had nothing. I picked up a glass of champagne. To freedom, I said, raising the glass. To freedom, everyone echoed. The room was warm. It was filled with love, not obligation. It was filled with people who knew me not, people who wanted something from me. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up. It was a text message. Sender, Mom. The room went quiet for a second. Marcus looked at me. Do you want to read it? He asked. I looked at the notification preview. Amara, please. It is Dad's birthday next week. We are struggling. We barely have food in the fridge. We miss you. Can we just talk? Please, we are family. I looked at the words. 6 months ago, those words would have broken me. I would have sent money. I would have tried to fix it. I would have set myself on fire to keep them warm. But I wasn't that woman anymore. That woman died on the patio in the rain. I picked up the phone. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing. It was the indifference of a stranger reading a spam email. I tapped the info button. I scrolled down to the bottom. Block caller. Confirm. I tossed the phone onto the velvet sofa. It landed with a soft thud. Everything okay? Marcus asked. I looked at him, and then I looked around at the beautiful life I had built from the ashes of their betrayal. Never better, I said. I took a sip of champagne, the bubbles dancing on my tongue. Who is ready for dessert? I asked. I bought a cake, and I promise nobody is going to smash this one on the floor. I laughed, and this time the laughter was real. It echoed through the house that belonged to me, filling the spaces where the silence used to live. This story serves as a powerful reminder that sharing DNA does not make you a family. It only makes you related. True family is built on mutual respect, love, and support, not transaction and abuse. Amara's journey teaches us that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an act of survival. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm, even if those people are your parents. Financial independence is the ultimate shield against manipulation, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away and never look back. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own peace? How did you find the strength to do it? I want to hear your story in the comments below. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they are worthy of respect. And remember, the best revenge is not hurting them back. It is living a life so beautiful that they can't even touch it. Thank you for watching.